All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to our inaugural Ask an Advisor, where we are taking questions from clients and trying to provide some insight into what those questions might be and try to help our clients get a better understanding of whatever's concerning them at this moment. My name is Brian Montanez. I'll introduce myself in just a moment, but first, I'm representing Multnomah Group. Multnomah Group is an institutional retirement plan consulting firm and fiduciary investment advisory. Headquartered in Portland, Oregon, we have about 161 clients and a little over 25 billion in assets. We do take a holistic and comprehensive approach to plan governance, including not only investments and fees, but proper governance structures, as well as vendor management. And important to us, we are an employee-owned shop. We have no outside shareholders, and we have no conflicts of interest in the sense that we derive our revenue 100% from invoicing our clients for our consulting services. As I mentioned, my name is Brian Montanez. I'm a principal with the firm and a consultant, and I'm joined here today by Brian Rollins. Brian.
Yes, no, thank you so much. Breon Rollins, consultant here based in Houston, Texas, and eager to get started today. But Brian, maybe I can jump into a few housekeeping details before we go into our first question. So the first thing we would say is that keep in mind that we've got a few questions that have already been shared our way, so eager to respond to those. But if you do have something that you hear or something sparks your interest while we're on the call today, please use that chat functionality. We'll be monitoring that and be able to hopefully respond in real time, or if not, be able to gather that answer and share it back to the entire group after the session today. Other than that, we're ready to kick things off.
All right, you asked for it, Brian, go for it.
All right. So our first question was based around how can I take advantage of high dividend stocks? And maybe to frame this discussion briefly, working in the space of defined contribution plans, it's a little different than you going out to a retail environment and attempting to pick stocks that may have a higher dividend. So let's just start with what a dividend is. A dividend stock is a publicly traded company that regularly shares its profits with shareholders through its dividends. Now, as we've got on the screen here, in the defined space, if you're in your defined contribution space, these companies tend to be more maybe in your large cap value side on your asset allocation. And let me give you an idea of what we're saying here. Your large cap value stocks or your large cap stocks tend to be those stocks that are greater in value in the market, maybe more than 10 billion, making them your more stable and mature type investments. And within that, you've got a strategy of large cap value. And that large cap value strategy attempts to construct a portfolio with those high quality, mature, resilient, durable organizations and businesses with some attractive valuations that may potentially be able to provide you some dividend stream over a long term. So what we have here, those are typically more lower volatility within your defined contribution plan. Of course, you've got that core investment menu that's put together, but then also you may be able to have some form of dividend stream that is paid back within those investments. Now, separate of your large cap value and or defined contribution space, within that space, typically, there can also be a self-directed brokerage window that allows participants to select investments outside of those core investment options that are a part of the plan. You would still be within the retirement plan, being able to take advantage of all the benefits that you have through your HRMS system, working with whatever retirement vendor that you're with, but you do have that separate option there where you may be able to go out and be a bit more selective. So we encourage you to visit back with your record keeper, with your providers to see if that may be some advice you can get on the type of investments within your unique plan that could have some of that large cap value exposure or a self-directed window for you to take advantage of also.
Thank you, Brian.
No problem.
So our next question is a bit of a loaded question. If you have a client that has a defined benefit pension plan, so not a 401k or 403b, but a traditional DB plan, and they're inquiring about terminating or de-risking, so we have to define what those are, do they know how to approach that and whom to contact for assistance? So first off, terminating a plan and de-risking a plan are different things. Terminating a plan is clearly the end of the plan. All assets are distributed. Plan does its final testing, 5,500 wrapped up, it's gone. But de-risking has a couple different flavors. So de-risking can be something more about volatility of assets or volatility of funding. Funding meaning how much money you have to put into the plan to keep it healthy. It can be an asset strategy, or it can be a way to reduce the number of participants and the uh, total gross amount of liabilities. So the first question has to go to the actuary. It's that simple. You have to go to your actuary to check on your funding ratios, right? If you're overfunded, that gives you more options. If you're underfunded, maybe you don't have as many options. If you are significantly underfunded, and the IRS defines what those ratios are, you may not, your benefits may be restricted in terms of what you can and can't do from a de-risking strategy. So de-risking is going to come down to each individual specific client. Generally speaking, it's talking about reducing the volatility of funding and assets, meaning we have a couple thousand people, which is a couple $100 million or whatever the number is. How can we reduce the volatility of our funding and or assets? So one of the easy ways is lump sum distributions. So you have former employees, and you can offer them the opportunity to take the current value of their future pension plan. This will reduce the head count, which helps with PBGC premiums, helps with the life liability of that participant, right? Because you're going to have to manage that money for the rest of their life. So if you can get more employees to take money out of the plan, that will de-risk the plan by reducing the amount of liability you have from a head count as well as from an asset. You can purchase annuities, both inside and outside. What is a pension? A pension is a lifetime stream of income. What is an annuity? It is a lifetime stream of income, or a period certain, or however you want to define it. It's a future stream of income. You can manage that future stream through the assets of your organization, or you can purchase an annuity inside the plan to pay for that stream of income, or you can annuitize individual participants as a distribution option and transfer that liability from you to an insurance company. If you're really more talking about the asset volatility rather than the pension liability, there's something called liability-driven investing, where you try to match the income stream that is needed to pay those benefits with an income stream from your investments. So think high value of bonds, where you match the liability that the plan has towards future payments with the income potential of a fixed income stream of current investments. And then there's plan termination, the ultimate de-risking, right? Just pay it out, be done with it. But that may, depending on your funding ratios, again, go back and talk to your actuary about where you stand on your funding ratios. The plan termination may have a cost, as in you may have to pony up some money to pay it out, and that may not be what you consider de-risking, but terminating the plan is the ultimate way to de-risk. You also are going to have to go to your board, right? Terminating a plan is generally considered a board level decision, at least with the committees that I work with. Very few have the power to terminate a plan itself. But you're going to need the board's buy-in either politically or legally, depending on what authority you've been delegated. And then you probably go talk to your investment advisor, right? Because first we have to figure out, again, what do we mean by de-risk? The liability or the investment volatility? So the investment advisor, if you are going to do any of these de-risking strategies, you're going to wind up with a new portfolio objective. So if you distribute a bunch of participants, or if you want to buy annuities, or if you're just trying to reduce the volatility of your investments, once you've figured out what you want, then you got to work with your investment advisor to figure out what the portfolio risk is, how we can reduce that risk through an asset allocation strategy, and then potentially, again, matching the liabilities with your assets in an LDI strategy. So it's a big question. I'd be happy to discuss it with anybody any further, but the simple answer is, do they know how to approach and whom to contact? They should absolutely start with their actuary, because it all comes down to the funding status of your plan.
Definitely.
All right, man, let's see what's next.
Yeah. Okay, so one of our favorite topics is next. Something that I'm sure all of us have been talking about over the previous year, Secure Act 2.0. There are several mandatory as well as optional provisions that are available for plan sponsors to consider. The questions here, they allude to one mandatory provision. So we'll talk about what happens on the 145,000 as it relates to catch-up contributions. And then the more optional provision would be the employer match that someone could do or an employer can do for a plan participant who is paying student loans and unable to participate in the retirement plan. So let's tackle the first one. Where what are you hearing on the 145,000 threshold for Roth catch up? Is it full gross W-2 or Social Security wages? So what we've been seeing as it relates to that, just to get some framing, that starting in 2024, if you have a participant whose age is 50 or older and will be able to make catch-up contributions typically as they would, now there would be a income cap or a W-2 wages cap of $145,000 from the previous tax reporting year and with the same employer. So those are two caveats that we wanted to draw out to your attention, that it is the previous tax year or the previous wage earning year. And it also is with that same employer during that period. You would be forced to make catch up contributions in an after tax or Roth scenario in a qualified retirement plan. So, to make it simple, what that would look like if you were working at an organization, you stayed with that organization into the next year, they will look back at your previous year's W-2 wages. And if you made 145,000 or more, and you were over the age of 50 looking to make a catch-up contribution, you will be required to make that catch-up contribution after tax basis. So that what we've seen is it's going to be your W-2 federally taxable wages that would be mandatory as it relates to that. So there's no flexibility that we've seen at all for the 145,000. One thing that you want to make sure is that you have good partnership with your record keeper, because that record keeper will be able to also assist you in monitoring what happens at those limits. Not only will you have some systems set up in your HRMS, whether it be Workday or PeopleSoft or whomever you might use, you'll be able to set up some tools there, but your record keeper can also support you like they do now with the current limits that take place, to set up maybe this new threshold for individuals who hit that cap of 145,000 in the previous year. Now, there are several discussions that a committee may have as it relates to how they want to move forward with catch-up contributions. Some plans may say, hey, everyone at this point, we need to update and to ease our administration. We want to change all to Roth or not allow catch-up contributions or just follow the guidelines that are being presented now. So there's many ways that you might have discussions with your committee, but again, going back to that board, being able to document the decision that you make is going to be very important as we look at this one mandatory provision starting in 2024.
Hey,
Now,
Brandon.
yeah,
So, 2 points. I think all plan sponsors need to start keeping records of hours.
definitely.
If you're subject to ERISA, you're going to do it for testing, so you'll have that. But if you're not subject to ERISA, there's this provision, right? And then there's another one, long-term part-time employees. I think all plan sponsors need to now develop a practice where at the end of the year, they document the hours worked for all employees for that year, because there are other Secure Act 2.0 provisions that take place in 24 or 25 that also are going to look back on hours. So I would say everybody needs to keep a good record of hours going forward. And then just so we don't confuse things, the definition of W-2 for 145 is about eligibility for this provision.
Correct.
Your match, your employer contributions, folks, that's going to be on what your document says is the definition of compensation. So please don't misunderstand what the IRS is saying about what Secure Act 2.0 is saying is 145. And then what your plan document says for the match or the non-elective or salary deferral. Your plan document is going to tell you what compensation is used for the calculations of how much do people defer and how much do they get. And that's separate from this.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, that definition of compensation that you have in your plan would be separate of that detail, but kick back to those IRS guidelines, that 145,000 is that number there. So no, thank you, Brian. Thank you for that context. The second piece, and this is one that is an optional provision. So first we talked about would be mandatory, no adjustments there. The optional provision would be allowing starting or an employer can provide a student loan matching contribution on behalf of employees who are making a student loan payment separate of being able to provide their employee deferral into the retirement plan. Now, there are some updates on how this will be administered, et cetera, but the question here is relating directly to the self-certification provision. And under the provision, an employer is not required to request or obtain student loan documentation and evidence of payments. And while that's been counter to some ways that we've done things before, whether that be a hardship or getting documentation for a home loan, et cetera, in this case, it would be just simply the participant will go out, self-certify the fact that they've been able to make those student loan payments. So there could be some cons to that, of course, but there also could be some benefits as it relates to some things that we've seen. It could be an attractive option that is added to plans, especially if you hire a lot of young professionals that may have a student loan balance that prohibits them from being able to participate in the plan. This could be something that allows you to attract and maybe retain some of those employees as you're able to provide now some benefit to the retirement plan at the same time while they're able to take care of that student loan balance without losing that participation in the retirement plan. So a lot with Secure Act 2.0. I think Brian and I could probably do really, we've done webinars in the firm with Secure Act 2.0, and I'm sure we'll be doing more. So be on the lookout for your email and details coming down the pipeline because there'll be plenty that we discuss with the new legislation over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months.
There are only 90 provisions. It's not.
That's why I went out 12 months. So I wasn't going to say right now. So yeah, thank you, Brian.
One of the attendees asked about the excessive fee lawsuits. It's in every industry rag, every email you see, somebody's being sued for high fees or poor performing funds. So it's kind of a very broad question. We don't know much about the person that asked the question. So it's going to be a long answer. Should I be concerned about excessive fee suits? Yes, absolutely. Right. I mean, that's a simple answer, right? But there are some practical interpretations of should I be concerned. Well, first off, if you're subject to ERISA, absolutely, because ERISA defines what being a prudent fiduciary would be. And if you do not understand what your fees are, and if you haven't done a benchmarking study recently, yeah, you should be concerned. But if you're a governmental entity, all these suits are coming under ERISA. Governmental is not subject to ERISA. Now, that does not mean you get a get out of jail free card. So here in California, our state trust laws are written to reflect ERISA, and where they are silent, judges turn to ERISA for interpretations. So just because you're a governmental entity, specifically here in California, does not mean that you get a pass on this. So yes, you should be concerned. If you're a church plan, again, you're not likely subject to ERISA. And again, similar state laws, you got to be concerned about, do I have a way to show that I've been paying only reasonable fees? So should you be concerned about excessive fee suits? Yes. But then there's some mitigating factors, right? Do you have a history of good governance? I'm fortunate enough to have some clients that I've worked with for 12, 13, 14 years. And every once in a while, this will come up. And it's usually at the end of the year when we do a regulatory update and we talk about excessive fee lawsuits. And the fact is, for those clients, we have documented records of our annual fee benchmarking report, our investment reports, and I would say we're fairly bulletproof. But that does not mean that you can't get sued, and does not mean that you won't have to defend yourself in court. That's a loss, right? Whether or not you win the case, you still lose because you have to defend yourself. So the history of good governance is a great defense, but you still may have to go to court to defend yourself. One of the other mitigating factors is plan size. Remember, these attorneys get paid on a percentage of the revenue that they recover. So if you're a small plan, $2 million, attorneys are not going to come after you because they just don't have the interest because the payday is not there. In fact, sorry, it was last year or the year before, it made national headlines that a $70 million retirement plan
Yeah.
was sued for excessive fees. Why? Because it's such a small plan. The ones that are being sued, 500 million and up, even a 500 million is small. You're talking about multi-billion-dollar plans that are being sued because there's a payday for the attorneys. And then, do you have fiduciary insurance? If you have fiduciary insurance, it's a really good aspect to calm you down a little bit. But as I've seen with several of my clients, fiduciary insurance will have something called the duty to defend, and that means legal fees. So if you don't have duty to defend in your fiduciary insurance, again, you may win the case, but you're still going to have to pay for the lawyers. Now, that's all kind of from the legal perspective. Should you be concerned about excessive fees? And if I drop the word suit, absolutely. Fees are the number one thing to eat away from your long-term savings. If you're paying higher fees in your retirement plan, you as an individual are going to have a lower account balance at the end of your life. In fact, if you invest over 30 years and you pay 1% higher fees, the math will show you that your final balance will be about 1/3 lower than what it should have been because you paid an extra 1%. So whether you should be concerned about fee suits depends on who you are, who you're governed by, how big you are, what your history of governance is, what your insurance policies say. Everybody should be aware, but the level of concern depends on who you are, what your practice is. All right, let's see what's next. Priya.
Okay. So back to provisions that this one's a little tricky because it appears that it might be a part of Secure Act 2.0, but let's give some framing here also. Back before 2020, pre-COVID, we also had this thing just called the Secure Act. And then Secure Act was passed. Then we had COVID-19. And then embedded in COVID-19, as COVID-19 was going on, we had the CARES Act. This actually comes from the CARES Act. So I want to give you just a bit detail because one of the more popular provisions that we hear or places that people have more conversation around that's not directly linked to the CARES Act, so to speak, would be the student loan forgiveness because the student loan pause took place as a part of the CARES Act. But one of the embedded benefits that participants and people may have started to see or employers was the benefit around an employer being able to include or being able to pay student loans on behalf of the participants within their plan. And the question we've got here is, can we use student loan repayment as compensation? And the answer is yes. That repayment is includable in the employee's gross income or their federal wages for employment tax purposes. And the benefit that was included in the CARES Act, and this would expire in 2025, at the end of plan year 2025. Now, we don't know if that could be in the extensions, et cetera. I know with the student loan payment pause, there has been several extensions, maybe just now as we've completed some of the conversation around the debt limit. It appears that one of the negotiating things were student loan payments need to restart at the end of August. And as relates to provisions still from the CARES Act, employers can offer up to 5,250. And man, a 52,000 would be great in student loan provisions.
I'll go back to school.
5,250 annually in student loan repayment through 2025. That is includable in the employee's wages. But keep in mind that is separate from the match provisions that we just discussed from Secure Act 2.0. So if you think about just a few slides ahead, as I was discussing the ability to provide a match to an employee who is self-certifying that they're paying student loans, that would not be the same as you actually paying student loans on behalf of the employee up to $5,250. So we don't want you to get those two items confused. It is separate from the new provisions in Secure Act 2.0, but this still is available, and it was more of a piece out of the CARES Act that happened in 2020. So keep that in mind as you look at both of those provisions. Could be options, could be benefits for participants within your plan.
And of course, check your plan document to see
Yes,
what it says about compensation, because a plan document will tell you what is compensation, or a plan document will tell you what is not compensation. And you're going to have to consider this source before you make contributions to a plan.
definitely, definitely. No,
What education and advice do we need to provide plan participants? So each company meeting, or for each meeting that we run, we try to do fiduciary education for our clients. And I do a piece on advice versus education. And I always ask my clients right up front. So is education required? And then I go through the piece and then I ask them again. So need versus want, first off. So what education and advice do we need to provide to plan participants? None. Literally none. What you do need, by definition of the law, is to provide the different notices and disclosures that will provide the information to a participant to make an informed decision. So fee disclosures, investment performance information, a summary plan description, that sort of stuff. Those are disclosures that are required by law. Do you have to have a group education effort or a one-on-one webinar or any of those things? No, you do not. And then there's effort versus benefit. So is it in your best interest? Is it in the plan's best interest? Is it in the participant's best interest to provide education and advice? Probably. From an education perspective, I think so. Getting participants and your employees to be better investors, more disciplined investors, will make them happier and more productive in your office. Behavioral finance will show that for sure. And it will help them accumulate a life savings to retire on time instead of sticking around the office for another couple of years. And it creates better morale, having an educated workforce. So you have to weigh the effort versus the benefit. But I think education is without a doubt worth the effort and worth the benefit, not required by law. When it comes to advice, careful. You want to make sure you're getting fiduciary advice, not a sales pitch to buy a third-party product. So before you have anybody provide advice to your participants, make sure you understand where their interests lie. If there's any conflicts of interest, are they using this opportunity to pitch their private wealth or some other products? So careful with advice, but yeah, the average American does need education and financial advice.
yeah, maybe to add a little color there, Brian, or ask a question. So on the advice side, do you recommend always a record keeper? What are your thoughts there? Because I know you mentioned, hey, wealth advisors, et cetera. What are your thoughts on the advice process?
Well, always no. What is always really? And it depends. So there are some good record keepers out there that do provide fiduciary advice. There are record keepers that have the advice engine generated by a third party. So it's just the employee of that record keeper delivering the information, but the advice comes from a third party. And then there are record keepers out there and advisors out there that are using this opportunity to gather assets, gather IRAs, put money into specific products. You can't get what you need from them. You need to work with me, and I'm going to charge you this percentage, and I'll take care of you. So always no, but there are some good record keepers that do have point in time advice that is based on a fiduciary standard. I think that's a good idea. And if they're not, then you have to be wondering what it is they're trying to achieve with their education and advice if they're not acting as a fiduciary.
Definitely. No, thank you for that.
All right, let's see what's next. This is necessary to take on an RFP project if satisfied with my current vendor. All right, let me take the top part. So necessary. Again, what does that mean? So should you do an RFP? Periodically, yes. If you're happy with your vendor, sort of irrelevant. If you're under ERISA, you have a responsibility to prudently spend your participants' money. What does that mean, spend my participants' money? Well, if you're hiring a record keeper, and in my career, I've only seen one plan sponsor pay for the record keeping services. So the fees that your record keeper are generating are coming from your participants. So you are spending your participants' money, and the DOL is very clear. You have to have a prudent process for determining that those fees for the services are reasonable. So if you're happy with them, you're probably going to be more inclined to agree with that statement, but you're going to need to have a benchmarking study and or do a survey of the market to see what other record keepers can offer you from a pricing proposal. And then there's the whole idea of, do I need to under ERISA? Yes, you need to. Under state, maybe, maybe not. I would go back and say, hey, California's written to reflect ERISA. So yes, I would think that you would need to. And a church plan, again, need. How do you define need? The question wasn't a legal question. So do you need to understand what's available out there in the market and do a check on your record keeper? I think so.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. And you started down the path of the discussion with fees, and maybe I'll come back to that. Just thinking about the fact that there are maybe features and benefits to your plan that maybe match well with your current provider, maybe services that they're currently not offering, that, hey, you just haven't been on the phone to ask for those services or those enhancements. Or you may see things like we mentioned here, competitive market research, that, wow, I didn't know this was a capability in this retirement plan space. I didn't know this was a capability for this with education or this with how we communicate to our participants. So being able to scan the market and review what's maybe best in class or what's happening in your plan segmentation size or the size of plan that you have is really important. And then just to loop back into the fee conversation, oftentimes without going and having fee benchmarking studies or reviewing of the market, someone doing that or you doing that on your own behalf, you often are just kind of locked into that pricing. There will be very rare that your provider may come back and say, you know what, we just want to give you a discount now. Sometimes those have to be conversations that you work yourself with and maybe with research and information. And then sometimes with that full request for a proposal, it gives you an opportunity to scan all fees, services, features, benefits that providers have that could give you some more context on things that you lack or areas that you like within your current environment with your plan sponsor or with your record keeper. And then you can keep those relationships good. So fees are one thing, but think about the value on participant experience, user interface, communication, education. There are a lot that can go into it. So that competitive market research really benefits the participants on the front end.
Yeah, if it ain't
And
broke, don't fix it. But
you can still ask for that discount though.
you don't know if it's broke unless you go out and look and see what else is out there.
Definitely. No, completely agree. So I think that brings us to our Q&A, right? If there's any other questions while we're on. And I have none right now in the chat. So that just means we've been doing a fantastic job at answering
you have,
these.
sir. And we're going to do these monthly, folks. So
Yes.
If we didn't get to a question, or if something spurred a question, by all means, submit it for the next one. And it may be Brianna and I, maybe another consultant in multiple group, but we're going to do these monthly. So if something was spurred in your mind, by all means, ask it now or wait for the next one.
Yeah.
Or reach out to Brianna and I directly. We're on the website.
Definitely. Well, good. I think that does it then, Brian. So.
All right. Thank you all for your time. Brianna, have a good day, man.
Thank you so much.